Welcome to the Founders Fire podcast. This is Eric Beck. I hope you guys are doing great today and you're ready to learn. Learners inherit the earth in times of change. I love that quote, and I know that's you, and that's why you're here. So whether you're just in a startup mode, you're an entrepreneur already, you run a business with a bunch of employees, wherever you are in your journey to align your work with your calling, this is going to be a really important one for you. Today's topic is called Faith in Failure. We're going to get into some meaty topics. One is diminished resilience. We're going to get into narcissism, a failed one-term president, WD-40. Failing isn't being a failure, and the problem with everyone getting a medal. Someone else's story, emotional equanimity, positivity and the law of attraction and the myths behind those, humility and losing our fear, and finally, the reality that there is no such thing as problems. So I'm excited to jump into this today. Not a pleasant topic, failure, but critical though, right? I mean, you can't get around it. We all know that. Thomas H. Palmer wrote a teacher's manual in 1840. If you've ever wondered where this came from, this quote about, "'Tis a lesson you should heed. Try again. If at first you don't succeed. Try again." 1840, and it was for teachers. If you've never been a teacher, you may not know the frustrations that come along with that wonderful profession. That was part of my life for a while, and I certainly loved teaching. I actually still consider myself a teacher, but teaching is nothing but failing. If you think about it, you're trying to help someone learn something that they don't know, and if it's of any real significance, they're not going to learn it the first time. If it's a physical skill or if it's just a mental concept, typically we don't just get it. And so I find it kind of funny that Thomas Palmer was like, look, I need to write this, in my teacher's manual. There's going to be failure, but we've got to stick with it. We've got to try again. It's important, though, to look at some research. And so I'm going to read a little bit from an article in the Scientific American to give us some background on this. I love the scientific approach when it's used, which means that you're supposed to question things, and then you're supposed to form a hypothesis and test it and go through that rigorous method. It is a wonderful idea, and if you are a person that knows much about the Bible or the scriptures in the Christian tradition, you'll know this verse that says, "Test everything and hold on to the good," from the New Testament. Test everything. Wow. We've heard the term faith, which we've thought of as just like, well, just believe it because someone says it, right? It's just like, that's really what we're talking about is don't test it, don't think about it, don't try it on for yourself, just kind of believe it. That's what having faith is, but it's not actually at all. That's what being gullible is, and that doesn't produce mature people who own their beliefs and can give an account of their values and who are on a journey of evolving and growing. As soon as we get fixed and locked into an idea, I think we start moving backwards and we start trying to protect the idea itself. Truth doesn't need any defense. It doesn't. And as we grow and move forward and mature, we recognize that when we were kids, we needed to hold our mom's hand and not walk across the street. But that truth needed to modify with maturity. And what is that maturity? That maturity is moving into, maybe as a teenager, you don't need to hold your mom's hand anymore. Is it still important, the principles? Yes. But the actual way that it plays itself out may be quite different. And that's what maturity really is. And that's what we want to do as we look at failure. Faith in failure, then, is not the blind, adherence to, great, I just blew it. It was terrible. That's a great thing. No. In fact, I'll tell you a story. Maybe you can think of one as well. When you may have had an epic failure. I don't mean a little failure, but I mean an epic failure. A minute ago, I was mentioning that I spent a lot of time teaching. That came out of a degree in music education that I got from Belmont way back in the day. And so music was a big part of my life for quite a while. And I was performing with an ensemble at a very prestigious event. I won't go into all that stuff, but it was a big deal. And I was very excited and nervous playing with an ensemble. And so what happened was we had a couple of hours worth of music that we had memorized to play for this performance. And we were in a warm-up area, and a lot of people had come to listen to us warm up. and prepare for the show. And I was not paying attention. And I believed that we were going to play a very bombastic, powerful orchestra piece. I don't for sure remember the name of it, but something like Mussorgsky or Shostakovich, one of these big, powerful Russian symphonies. And it starts off with this, I played trumpet, so this big, powerful high note, right? And so the conductor, everyone was silent, everyone's ready to play, seated at attention. The horns go up, everybody gets ready, and the conductor does the prep with his arms. And when he gives the downbeat, I'm thinking it's this powerful, loud piece. I think you know where this is going. It wasn't. It was not that at all. In fact, it was a very soft, wonderful ballad. So I blasted out this high note. And if you know anything about performing music, really good musicians are listening, right? You're not just making the sound, you're listening to your sound and everyone else's and how it goes together. I could tell instantly something was wrong because nobody else was doing anything like what I was doing. And so I stopped this note in the most embarrassing way that sounded like a duck flying into a brick wall or some squawk of epic proportions. And the conductor stopped. It was so horrible. The conductor just stopped conducting, put his arms down, and just glared at me. Wow, that was not one of my favorite moments. An epic failure for sure. Well, how can we have faith in something like that? Well, I guess at the surface, you can say it will teach you to pay attention, and that's certainly true. But I also think that failing is an opportunity for us to see things in a different light. Sometimes we become, I guess we could say, a little bit self-deluded in the way we think things are. We're sure that fill in the blank is true. We're sure that the way we see the situation is really accurate. And it takes some failing to get that grain of salt, to take things with a grain of salt, to not have an over-exuberance in our ego or our egos need to be right, or that kind of clamp down on that. And failure is a wonderful wrench to pry that idea loose from our hands. And I certainly have had more than that one, but that was a pretty epic one. I won't imitate the squawk. But if you could just imagine the worst sound that could ever come from a trumpet in front of 400 or 500 people, in preparation for this performance, that was a tough one to recover from. But I did, and I really feel like all of us have probably had something like that. It may not be that public, but we've all had failures. Well, anyway, back to this article from the Scientific American. It says, the recipe for succeeding in any given field is hardly a mystery. Good ideas, hard work, discipline, imagination, perseverance, and maybe a little luck. I would say definitely that's involved too. And let's not forget failure, which Dashan Wong and his colleagues at Northwestern University call the essential prerequisite for success. So if you're going to put your faith in something, it seems like it would make sense to really consider if it was an essential prerequisite for success. He's written a paper that, among other things, is based on an analysis of 776,721 grant applications submitted to the NIH from 1985 to 2015. So I'll go on here, in their effort to create a mathematical model that can reliably predict the success or failure of an undertaking, the researchers also analyzed 46 years' worth of venture capital startup investments. They also, and hold on to your hats for this one, tested the model on what Wong calls their least conventional, quote unquote, but nevertheless important data set, 170,350 terrorist attacks carried out between 1970 and 2017. Well, that's kind of an interesting set of data to be looking at, but they found some amazing things that we'll talk about in a minute. In the big picture, ultimately, not every failure does lead to success. So to go back to our quote from Thomas Palmer, try again. Well, maybe not. We use this phrase in music, and it's used in many places, practice makes perfect. But I'd like to modify that. I'd like you to upgrade that phrase in your library to practice makes permanent. Whatever we repeatedly do is what we're going to tend to keep doing. And if what we're doing isn't working and we're not seeing progress, then what we're doing is practicing failure. So the idea of doing it harder or doing it faster or more with more intensity, there are some situations where that can be a benefit, but usually not many. So ultimately, what separates the winners from the losers, according to the research, is certainly not persistence. One of the more intriguing findings in the paper published, and this is one that they're referencing, the Scientific American is referencing this study published in Nature, is that the people who eventually succeeded and the people who eventually failed tried basically the same number of times to achieve their goal. Well, that's kind of interesting, right? We think, well, the person who just stayed with it, that's the one who's going to succeed, but that is just not the case. If you've ever had a really significant problem that you're trying to work through, you'll know that it's not about how much you try. It is about the way that you try. It turns out, again, back to the article, it turns out that trying again and again only works if you learn from your previous failures. The idea is to work smart, not hard. Quote, you have to figure out what worked and what didn't, and then focus on what needs to be improved instead of thrashing around and changing everything. Now, most of you guys know my background. I've been working with small business owners and entrepreneurs for the last 2 decades plus, and that is one thing everyone in this category does. When it's not working, people tend to come up with a new idea, and they change this and change that and change the other thing. Sometimes it works, but it is not a scalable, systemized, stable process by which to grow an enterprise. And I find it funny and a little bit ironic that's what the data in this study shows as well. It says the people who failed didn't necessarily work less than those who succeeded. They could actually have worked more. It's just that they made more unnecessary changes. So if something is wrong and we change 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 variables, we're not going to really know what was wrong because we made too many changes. So typically, and we'll talk about system building here in just a second, when we're approaching a difficulty, we have some technical strategy to share with you today, but also some thinking strategy. First of all, let's talk about this idea of diminished resilience. In our culture today, we don't have a lot of endurance. Why? Well, to go back to my generation, in the 1980s, if you wanted to watch Magnum PI and you weren't ultra wealthy, you had to show up to CBS or whatever station it was on Thursday at 8 p.m. And that was it. And if you were late, you missed the first part. And if you missed the whole thing, you missed the whole thing. You're not even going to get a replay, right? It's sorry. That episode is come and gone, and you're going to have to wait until next week. Do you guys remember the time where you couldn't hear any song you wanted? You couldn't. I remember having favorite songs and listening to the radio in Tennessee where I grew up to KZST 106. I think that's the name of their FM radio station, KZ 106, hoping that the next song would be that song, right? You see, there was a lot of waiting. There was a lot of not getting your way. There wasn't any episode of any show at any time, any song, any performance. You can hear it whenever you want. There was a tremendous amount of waiting. I'll even say one more hilarious thing that I know you may think makes me sound like a dinosaur. Do you remember when you were listening to a song on a cassette tape and you listened to one whole side and then you wanted to listen to the first song? Yeah, you'd have to wait till what? Till the tape rewound. There was just waiting. And so our culture has pursued this idea of technology to get rid of waiting or downtime or inefficiency. But that's been a terrible lie, because not only did it not work, it took something from us. It took resilience. It took dealing with failure. Now, I tried to compete in all kinds of sports when I was young, and wasn't so good at any of that. And I remember the first time I ever won something on field day. Field day was at the end of school and elementary school, and we would all go out to this big giant field and do a bunch of games and broad jump and the football throw and whatever else we were going to do. One of the events was the three-legged race. And if you've never done a three-legged race, just imagine standing beside someone and shoulder to shoulder, let's say your left shoulder to their right shoulder facing the same direction. And then someone would tie a rope or something like that around your legs so your legs are tied to each other, and thus the name, the three-legged race. And if you moved in unison with your person, you could go pretty good. You couldn't quite sprint, but you could go pretty good. If, however, you did not run at the same speed or go in unison with your partner, you were going to fall on your face. That's the only athletic event I can ever remember winning. I did play football for a while, so we won some football games and I won some tennis games. But in terms of like just this, kind of raw, can you do, 25 pull-ups kind of thing, and especially at a young age, that was epic. I was just out of my mind happy about this. Okay, but what happened in all the other events I competed in? We'll just talk about the long jump. Okay, what happened? Well, I came in 9th or 14th or 20th or 70th. What did I get? Nothing. Nothing. There wasn't a participation medal. There wasn't a certificate. There wasn't a photo op. It didn't go on Instagram. Nothing. Now, did that crush me and remove all my self-esteem and just make me be a little weakling with no resilience? No, it didn't. I think in a lot of ways it did the opposite. It made me say, what did the other person do that I didn't do? And in some cases, you can say, well, they're just older or they're stronger or whatever. But in most cases, it was like, well, they just practiced more. They just tried harder. They just cared more. And that's something that we've really left behind. So when we look at kind of where culture is, we start to see this diminished resilience. You might call it a tolerance for effort. So for most of you guys who are listening to this, you probably run a business. Think about your employees right now. Would you characterize them as having a high tolerance for effort? Do they have resilience? Or do you see evidence that has gone the way of cassette tapes? Okay, if you do see that it's gone the way of cassette tapes, as I do, that's not going to do you any good to complain about it, right? That is the state of things in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, because there is no more waiting. There's digital 4K, surround sound, everything all the time, right? There's no more waiting. There's nothing in the structure of society to build that skill. Now, you could say, well, there really wasn't anything in the structure of the prior societies or cultures to build it. It was an accident of bad technology or more primitive technology. I'll grant you that. I don't think someone came up with a cassette tape or with, the 3 channels on TV with the idea of making you wait so that you'd learn lessons and it would develop your character. No, you're right. It wasn't that, but it had that effect. It had that effect. And so many things that were less electronically based, and someone can probably elucidate all that better than me, but there is something very, very interesting about what has been transferred in terms of values and what has been removed in terms of values when technology has been aimed at ease, efficiency, entertainment, amusement, this kind of lulling ourselves, amusing ourselves to death, to quote the title of the book. That's still something we have to take a look at. And now I think that technology is great. This podcast is a part of technology, all this stuff. There's another side to it that we've got to pay attention to. Now, with employees who don't have a great work ethic, or they don't seem to have a lot of resilience or tolerance for effort, what in the world can we do? Well, that's really what Founders Fire as a coaching program is all about, how to make work a game worth playing. And well, I won't go into all that right now. I'll just say this. You're going to have to stop whining and wishing it was 1980, or wishing that people's parents did things that they don't do anymore, or that this thing would be different in the school systems, or that this thing would be different. Yeah, that's all true. And if you're called to one of those areas and can make a difference there, please do. We all need help. But the reality is that when you need to hire for a job and you bring somebody on your team, they're on your team. Jocko Willink style extreme ownership. Take ownership of their journey, of their development, of their performance, of how they grow. Take ownership of helping them get motivated. Take ownership of allowing yourself to get involved instead of sitting back and going, gosh, why don't you do it this way? This generation is lazy and myopic and whatever other, things that we'll say. Really, that's actually lazy. It is. It's a kind of emotional laziness where we're just, having a bit of a pity party and going into victim consciousness instead of saying, hey, this person never was taught that. And I can make a difference here. It does lead to a very strange phenomena, which is narcissism. So when you are so obsessed with victory that you think you're horrific if you get fourth place, instead of, hey, fourth place is better than fifth place, and 80th place is better than 81st place, right? The perspective there. When we don't have that perspective, we tend towards narcissism. And a lot of our technology feeds a narcissistic worldview. And not just in men, but in women too, where there's such an emphasis on the outer appearance. There's such an emphasis on how things look and will be interpreted. Anymore people are like afraid to say anything because you could take any one clip or part of something that somebody's recorded and put on the internet and splice it and edit it and absolutely frame it in a way that makes it sound like they're saying the opposite of what they're saying. I would just say this, anything that lasts 30 seconds or less that you hear on the news, don't believe it. Don't believe it because you're not getting any of the context. And so often the little phrases get parroted around, just like in 1984, the newspeak, these little words and little phrases that now mean things that never meant that before. And there's the in language and the out language and all this nonsense. What that is about is fear. It's about control. And we got to be careful not to play that game. When we're bringing somebody on to our team, as we're leading our team, the little 30-second soundbite communications, I guess they're okay for Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. But the reality is they're not actually good communication. It's a lot of information, but there's nothing really being communed around. There's no communication. We're not really sharing something. And so what happens is it just puts us in a higher state of anxiety, and we get so afraid of failing because we're so obsessed with how we come off to everyone. Now, I promised I'd mention to you guys a failed one-term president and how this is very relevant. Now, some of you may have a name in your mind right now, but it's probably not the one I'm going to say. A failed one-term president. Try Teddy Roosevelt, who had all kinds of epic failures leading up to his being the president and other things. But he was busy busting monopolies and leading us through the Great Depression. He was taking failure as feedback. He wasn't taking failure as a final judgment. He's one of my favorite presidents, and if you haven't read about him or done a little bit of research on him, I would recommend that you do so, simply because what would it take to get us through literally a famine? What would it take to get us through these large companies or powerful families scooping up the majority of many industries? It's not totally different than right now. It is different in some ways, but in some ways not so different. What does it take to lead through those kinds of crises? It takes someone who's not afraid of failing. One of my favorite stories, I've got a bunch about Teddy Roosevelt, but I'll save those for a different podcast, sorry. But one of my favorite stories about failing is the lubricant WD-40. Everybody probably has used WD-40. It's in that blue can. It's got the little red straw, and you spray it on hinges and stuff, and it's a lubricant, and it works great. What in the world does the name mean? What is WD-40? Well, apparently, the guy who invented it was not actually trying to create a lubricant. He was trying to create something that would displace water and prevent rust. So WD stands for water displacement. Okay? What do you think 40 stands for? You got it. 40 different formulas. And I love that. 39, not working. 38, not working. 12, not working. Okay, now back to what the research was telling us. What was different? Was he just Doing the same thing over and over and over? No. That's the Einstein quote about crazy, right? Expecting a different result. He was learning from his failures, which means he wasn't changing much each time. Okay, if there were 10 components to this formula, he needed to just change one and then test it out again. And then put that one back where it went and change number 2 and test that and put that back where it went, right? Go to the earlier iteration. If he changed 1, 3, 7, and 4, right, and then it did work, he wouldn't really know why, right? And if it didn't work, he wouldn't really know what to do next. So that systematic, logical approach is so powerful in pushing through and finding the right solution. WD-40, water displacement, 40th formula, and now it's a global phenomenon. I don't know if that really fits for a lubricant, but everybody knows about it. It succeeded, we'll put it that way. So failing isn't being a failure. Okay, so if I fail, I'm not a failure. I've had a failure, right? Let's say you're working on your fitness and you want to get to where you can do a pull-up. And so you go to the pull-up bar and you grab onto it, you lift your feet off the ground and you pull as hard as you can and your arms barely bend, okay? Your chin is nowhere near the bar. And you say, oh, I failed at doing a pull-up. But are you a failure? No. We would say someone is a failure who then gives up permanently and has the mentality of, this will never work, I can never do this. So that actual first effort is quite important. And really, you've succeeded in many ways in just getting up to that pull-up bar, giving it a try, risking your ego to see if you can do it or not. And if you've got a buddy or a friend who's a trainer, maybe they help you out and they get some of those resistant bands and they loop them around this thing or that thing and put it under one of your feet, or there's some other assisting ways to do pull-ups, and it makes it a little bit easier. So you can start to complete 5 or 6 assisted pull-ups. And then in a few weeks, you try another unassisted pull-up and maybe you get halfway. And it's like, yeah, I failed again. I didn't do a pull-up, but not really though. Because while you did fail at trying to do an entire pull-up, you're not a failure because you are making progress. Everybody gets a medal and all that stuff. You know, I do understand it. And I know that there can be a brutality amongst kids, adults too, in mocking each other and cutting each other down and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, really, that's also part of the battle of learning. Okay, if I try to do something and I fail epically and other people make fun of me, that's just more of the workout. If I take it personally and I think they're right and I'm terrible, I'm awful because they said so, that's what we call giving away your sovereignty. Okay, nobody gets to decide who you are and what you're capable of but you. And the same would go for our team at work, for our family, for our friends, people we interact with. But it starts with us. How do we think about messing up, about not doing well? Well, I like this. One of my clients has said this over the years. I've helped her with her business, multiple businesses. She's incredibly successful. And she says, you know, it's like reading a story. And you just say, gosh, what's going to happen in this chapter? And I'm like, what a healthy way to approach difficulty and setback. Instead of letting it come kind of like all over the windshield and like submerge you, it's like stand back from it and go, wow, I wonder how that character is going to make it through this part of the story. This will be exciting. Now that takes some emotional control, because one of the things that we'll do when things are bad is called catastrophize. And we would say, if this thing is bad, this and this and this are also probably going to be bad. And then that will make this thing be bad, and we snowball, okay? Now, a lot of people who do that don't recognize they do it in the positive too. If they're playing a simple little game, or they're just having fun doing something, or they're coming up on a red light, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to get the green light, and it goes red. Or they're playing a game, and they lose the game. What they can do is the same thing in the opposite. They can catastrophize and say, oh, these bad things mean bad things are going to happen. But they can also say, oh, these good things mean everything's great. And what you're getting is kind of a roller coaster effect. That when things are good, you got your parking spot, you got your favorite coffee, this thing happened, that it's like, hey, this day is going great. No, it's not. It's not going great. Okay, those things worked out. And in the same way, if you didn't get your coffee, you didn't get to parking spot, you had a flat tire, I'm having a terrible day. No, you're not. No, you're not. It's just not the day you expected. And ultimately, seeing the difference between those two is a matter of perspective. If you're at a sporting event, let's say a track meet or something, and you're competing and you get last place, and you're really bummed out about that. Okay, it's fair to feel bad, but it's also important to remember there's probably someone who's paralyzed who would do just about anything to have run that track race and gotten last place. And when you start thinking about your awful is somebody else's heaven, it's someone else's dream come true, this is where we get what I would call emotional equanimity, where we don't go too high on the highs and we don't go too low on the lows. I'm not talking about being stilted or jaded or kind of all pent up. I don't mean that. But it means that there's a healthy detachment from how great it is and what that must mean. Yeah, it's great. It is great. That's awesome. Is that it? No. There's a lot more life to live. Okay. Oh, it's terrible and it's bad and it's just the worst thing ever. Well, it is tough. But is that it? No. There's a lot more life to live. That emotional equanimity is probably one of the most important things we can bring as entrepreneurs and leaders, because we are going to face the setbacks and we are going to hit some home runs. I think it was Bear Bryant, a famous college football coach, who was chastising one of his football players for celebrating in the end zone. Have you guys heard this one? And he said something to the effect of, when you're in the end zone and you've just scored a touchdown, I want you to act like you've been there before and act like you will be there again. That's emotional equanimity in a perfect little phrase. Okay, coming down the home stretch here, guys, positivity and the law of attraction myth. This is more of what we're talking about with just kind of the mindset and saying, if you guys haven't seen What About Bob, it's an older movie, but you have to see it because it's just that funny. It's Richard Dreyfuss and whoever the guy was in Ghostbusters, Bill Murray. And it's just, and other folks, of course, just totally hilarious, right? And this guy is, the main character, Bob Wiley, is afraid of everything, right? And he's like trying to talk himself into being, positive or good. I am great. I am wonderful. I can make it. You got this. And it's funny because today that scene is like, yeah, that's great. Talk therapy. Back in the day, it was like, that's hilarious. Like, that's not what makes you great, is saying that. Now, having said that, the way we think and what we focus on has a huge impact on us. So I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But if you think about doing pull-ups, but you never practice them, you don't do any assisted pull-ups, you don't do any, I don't know what it's called, but when you jump up on the pull-up bar and you hold on and you keep your chin above the bar and just do that static hang or whatever, if you're not doing things that'll incrementally get you there, no amount of thinking is going to do it. And there's a lot of folks today that have kind of been given over to this kind of Tower of Babel kind of superstition, worship of ideas. If I get the right idea in my brain, then somehow I'm magically going to draw this success to me and whatnot. And, I just want to say, drop it. Just stop. Just no, don't do it. Fake it till you make it is you're a fake. No wonder people have imposter syndrome, right? Because you are an imposter. That's different than saying, today I can do half a pull-up and next week I can do 3/4 of a pull-up. I'm not faking it saying I can do a whole pull-up today. You don't want to do that. You don't want your people to do that. You want an honest assessment of what can be done now. And then you want a very clear, coherent, cogent plan about what we will do to increase our knowledge and our skill and our effectiveness. Okay, that's really esteemable behavior. And guess what? Self-esteem comes from doing esteemable acts, and improving is highly esteemable. And you should feel good about it, even if you're not nailing it and doing it perfect. Okay. When we do fail, even though we've tried very, very hard, maybe we're competing in some way, we lose a contract, we're hoping for a certain client or a situation or getting a new job or whatever, and we just don't get it. Something was really out of our control. We practiced and did all the stuff we're supposed to do. Well, guess what? The phrase is, life isn't fair. Fair is where the ponies are. So we're not looking for fair. We're looking for opportunity and doing our absolute best and then moving to the next opportunity. Humility is what comes when we fail. We just are humbled. I thought it was awesome, and I thought they'd say yes. And to me, it made perfect sense. But this is where, again, we step back with that emotional equanimity and we say, well, it doesn't all come through my lens. And there's other ways to look at this. What are those other ways? And if I look at it in those other ways, guess what? I am now, as they say, failing forward. And I'm moving forward to try something just a little bit different next time. Also, sometimes it can be that you lose a sense of fear. If you fail pretty epically, one of the things that you'll find is that you're actually okay. You're actually okay. If you guys have seen the documentary with Nims, I can't remember his last name, but he did the documentary 14 Peaks. He's this amazing climber. He was in a special forces group. I don't know if it was the British SAS or a different one like that. Anyway, I'm sorry for butchering his story, but definitely go check out the video. And he has some of the most hilarious phrases. I'll keep it PG in case you have kids in the car, but he was like, when you think you're effed, you're only about 40% effed, which I thought was awesome. He was like, because you don't have any good bearing for how bad is it. Now, this is a guy who like climbs Everest and the next day climbs, some other crazy mountain. Like it's unbelievable, like 14 mountains in a row. It's really unbelievable. So he's in absolutely life and death situations. And he's saying, look, it's not as bad as your mind makes it out to be. And when you think that's it, it's over, you got about another 60% to go. I don't think that means like physical strength, although sometimes your mind can get going crazy and with enough adrenaline, things can happen. I wouldn't count on that though. But I do think your mentality makes a huge difference, right? If you think a certain way. You guys have probably heard of the placebo effect, right? People will take a sugar pill, they think it's a medicine and it improves their symptoms or they get healed from whatever. Pretty crazy how powerful the mind is. Have you heard of the nocebo effect? This is mind-boggling. The story that I'll tell you is it's just hard to believe that it's true, but it is. And it was a guy and his girlfriend, and they get in an argument and break up, and he comes back to the apartment and finds the letter, I think we should break up, and it's a big tragedy and a whole thing. And so in his depression and woe is me-ism, he decides to commit suicide. So he gets a bottle of his girlfriend's drugs or whatever pills she's taking, prescription, and takes like 70 pills. He soon collapses, and when she comes back to the apartment, finds that he's in a coma. Calls 911, they rush there, he's barely alive, and he's in a coma for the next 3 weeks. During the coma, they're trying to figure out what was in the pills, and you already know where this is going. They find the lot number on the bottle, and they realize that she's a part of a trial. And so they call the researchers to find out and explain the situation. And they say, well, that lot number, that bottle, those were all sugar pills. So the guy thinks he's taking some pharmaceutical that's going to kill him, and it nearly does. So I'm not saying our thoughts don't matter. They really, really do. But ultimately, it is not just thinking positively or that sort of thing. It is about, I guess the phrase really is transforming your mind. It's not just new thoughts, it's a new way of thinking. And that can do something absolutely incredible or absolutely destructive. So let's land the plane with this as we look at faith and failure. No such thing as problems. What does that mean? Well, if you've been around the Founders Fire podcast for any length of time, or you've heard me speak or any of our coaches talk, been on webinars, come to our retreats or whatever, you've heard us say this. There are no such things as problems. There are only broken or missing systems. That is emotional equanimity. This is not a problem. This is a broken or missing system. Oh, so if I had the right system or I fixed this system, this thing wouldn't happen anymore, or it would happen way less. Correct. Oh, well, let's get busy building the system. That seems doable, right? But if you're like, this is such a problem, and you let the drama and the emotion really just flood in, then likely you're going to get stuck. You're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to get frustrated, and everything's going to head in the wrong direction. But if you just step back and go, oh, This is just the result of a missing or broken system. Then we can get to working on those things. And if you're like, well, I don't know how to build this kind of system, well, great. That's what people who are experts who've done it and have learned and gone through WD-31 and WD-32 until they got to WD-40, right? That's exactly why we need coaching. Coaching is not about finding a coach who has all the right answers, but it is about finding folks who know about a process that will lead you to the right answers. And that is such an incredible and powerful thing. I hope you guys have found this useful, faith in failure, that you can put your faith in failure. You can put your confidence in failure. You can lean on the structure of failure. If you do what? Not practice makes perfect, but realize practice makes permanent. And so if we don't want to keep repeating the failure, we've got to do the most important thing. In addition to trying again, we have to make this the minor modification and become a student. Instead of letting our ego kind of drive us to be afraid of failure, afraid of what that means, afraid of our image, afraid of how we look, and be driven by that and just want to get the gold medal every time because we showed up, we've got to look at it a different way. Could we even say, back to Jocko Willink, good when that bad thing happens? Could we say, good, this is just a system that's broken or missing? I'll tell you what, even if you can start to do that a little bit, you're going to start to see a big change, not only in your attitude, but the people around you. Remember, as we lead teams, they're getting what we're giving, not what we're talking about. They learn from example, they learn from watching. And so if you're not quite happy with your team in this area, I'll tell you what, look in the mirror. We've all got work to do on this one. All right, well, that's it for this episode of the Founders Fire podcast. Like I said, I hope you found it useful. Come check us out at foundersfire.com. If we can help, we'd love to. And until next time, go out there and go strategic. See you guys.